the cooling world and the first oceans after the violence of its formation, Earth began to cool. This was not a quick process. The planet was essentially a ball of molten rock surrounded by an atmosphere of toxic gases. But slowly, over millions of years, heat radiated into space. The surface began to solidify. A thin crust formed, like skin on cooling soup. This early crust was nothing like the continents we know today. It was thin, fragile, and constantly being recycled. Volcanic eruptions punched through it. Meteorite impacts shattered it. The mantle beneath churned with convection currents, breaking and reforming the surface over and over. But gradually, patches of solid rock began to accumulate. Some of these rocks sank back into the mantle. Others floated on top, too buoyant to be pulled down. The oldest known rocks on Earth are the Acasta gneiss formations in northern Canada, dated to about 4 billion years ago. These ancient stones have been squeezed, heated, and transformed countless times. Yet they survive as witnesses to Earth's earliest solid surface. Even older are tiny crystals called zircons, found in younger rocks in Western Australia. Some of these zircons are 4.4 billion years old, formed just 150 million years after Earth itself. The chemistry of these ancient zircons tells us something remarkable. The conditions under which they formed suggest liquid water was already present on Earth's surface 4.4 billion years ago. This is much earlier than scientists once thought possible. It means that despite the ongoing bombardment, despite the hellish temperatures, water had already begun to accumulate. The foundations for life were being laid. Earth's original atmosphere, the one it was born with, did not last long. The young sun blasted it away with intense radiation and solar wind. But volcanoes soon replaced it with a new atmosphere, belched out from the planet's interior. This second atmosphere was nothing like the air we breathe today. It was thick with carbon dioxide, nitrogen, water vapor, and trace amounts of other gases. There was essentially no free oxygen. If you could travel back in time and take a breath of this ancient air, you would die almost instantly. Carbon dioxide levels were perhaps 100 times higher than today. The pressure was crushing. The temperature, thanks to an extreme greenhouse effect, may have exceeded 200 degrees Celsius in some periods. It was more like Venus than the Earth we know. But this thick atmosphere served a crucial purpose. It trapped heat, keeping the planet warm enough for liquid water to exist once temperatures dropped below the boiling point. Without this early greenhouse effect, Earth might have frozen into an ice ball. The very gases that would have killed us were essential for creating the conditions that would eventually allow us to exist. As Earth continued to cool, something magical began to happen. Water vapor in the atmosphere condensed, clouds formed, and then it began to rain. Not a gentle shower, but a deluge that may have lasted for millions of years. Every drop of rain that fell was hot, almost boiling. It hit the still warm surface and often evaporated back into the sky, only to condense and fall again. Gradually, puddles formed. Puddles became ponds. Ponds became lakes. Lakes merged into seas. And finally, the first true ocean covered much of Earth's surface. Scientists estimate this happened between 4.4 and 4.2 billion years ago. By 4 billion years ago, Earth was a water world. The continents, such as they were small, scattered islands rising from a global ocean. Where did all this water come from? The question has puzzled scientists for decades. Some water was trapped in the rocks that formed Earth, released by volcanic activity. Some arrived on comets and asteroids during the late heavy bombardment. Recent research suggests most of Earth's water was actually present from the very beginning, inherited from the solar nebula and locked in minerals that released it as the planet heated up. However it arrived, the presence of liquid water changed everything. Water is the universal solvent. It breaks down rocks, carries minerals, and provides the medium in which complex chemistry can occur. Without water, life as we know it would be impossible. The formation of the oceans was perhaps the single most important event in making Earth habitable. The spark of life. How did life begin? This is perhaps the greatest unsolved question in all of science. We know that life exists. We know that all living things on Earth share a common ancestor. We know approximately when life first appeared, but the exact mechanism by which non-living chemistry transformed into living biology remains elusive. The oldest definitive evidence of life comes from fossils of microorganisms in rocks from Western Australia and South Africa, dated to about 3.5 billion years ago. But these are already relatively complex cells. Life must have originated earlier. Chemical signatures in rocks from Greenland suggest biological activity as far back as 3.8 billion years ago. Some researchers have even claimed evidence of life in rocks 4.1 billion years old, though this remains controversial. If these early dates are correct, it means life appeared on Earth almost as soon as conditions allowed. The planet was barely cool enough to have liquid water, and already tiny organisms were swimming in it. This suggests that the origin of life, while still mysterious, may not be as improbable as we once thought. Given the right conditions, life might arise quickly and easily. Scientists have proposed many theories about how life began. One of the oldest and most famous is the primordial soup hypothesis. In the 1920s, Alexander Oparin and John Haldane independently suggested that early Earth's atmosphere, struck by lightning or ultraviolet radiation, could have produced simple organic molecules. These molecules accumulated in the oceans, forming a kind of nutrient-rich broth. Over time, more complex molecules formed, eventually giving rise to the first cells. In 1953, Stanley Miller and Harold Urey tested this idea. They filled a flask with gases they believed represented Earth's early atmosphere: water, methane, ammonia, and hydrogen. They zapped this mixture with electrical sparks to simulate lightning. After just a week, the water had turned brown with organic compounds, including several amino acids, the building blocks of proteins. The experiment showed that the raw materials for life could form naturally under plausible early Earth conditions. But the primordial soup hypothesis has problems. The early atmosphere may not have been as hydrogen-rich as Miller and Urey assumed. And even if you have amino acids, getting them to form proteins and then living cells is an enormous leap. The soup might provide ingredients, but it does not explain how those ingredients assembled themselves into something alive. A more recent theory points to hydrothermal vents on the ocean floor. These vents spew hot, mineral-rich water from deep within the Earth. They provide energy, warmth, and chemical gradients that could drive reactions. Some vents, called white smokers, produce alkaline fluids that might have served as natural electrochemical cells, providing the energy to build complex molecules. Fossils of some of Earth's oldest known life forms have been found near ancient hydrothermal vent systems. Another possibility is that life did not originate on Earth at all. The panspermia hypothesis suggests that microorganisms, or the building blocks of life, arrived from space, perhaps on meteorites or comets. We know that amino acids and other organic compounds exist in asteroids and interstellar space. We know that some bacteria can survive the extreme conditions of space travel. Perhaps Earth was seeded with life from elsewhere in the cosmos. This idea does not solve the ultimate problem of how life began, but it would expand the time and space available for that origin. One of the most compelling ideas about early life is the RNA world hypothesis. Today, living cells use DNA to store genetic information and proteins to carry out chemical reactions. But this creates a chicken and egg problem. DNA needs proteins to replicate, but the instructions for making proteins are stored in DNA. Which came first, RNA or ribonucleic acid, might be the answer. RNA is a molecule similar to DNA, but with some key differences. Crucially, RNA can both store genetic information and catalyze chemical reactions. In the 1980s, scientists discovered that certain RNA molecules, called ribozymes, can act as enzymes. This means RNA could have played both roles in early life, serving as both the genetic material and the molecular machinery. In this scenario, the first living things were not cells as we know them, but self-replicating RNA molecules floating in the primordial ocean. These molecules made copies of themselves with occasional errors. Some errors produced molecules that replicated faster or more accurately. Natural selection had begun over billions of generations. These simple replicators evolved greater complexity. Eventually, DNA took over the job of information storage because it is more stable, while proteins took over catalysis because they are more versatile. RNA was relegated to its current role as an intermediary. The RNA world remains a hypothesis, but it is supported by intriguing evidence. The ribosome, the molecular machine that builds proteins in all living cells, is fundamentally an RNA structure. The core reactions of protein synthesis are carried out by RNA, not protein. This suggests ribosomes are ancient relics from a time before proteins existed. The RNA world may be written into the very machinery of life. The Hadean Eon and the age of microbes. The Hadean Eon stretches from about 4 billion to 2.5 billion years ago. During this immense span of time, more than 1.5 billion years, Earth was ruled by microbes. There were no animals, no plants, no fungi, just single-celled organisms, invisible to the naked eye, yet powerful enough to transform the planet. The Hadean Earth would have looked strange to our eyes. The sky was probably orange, tinted by atmospheric methane and the absence of oxygen. The oceans may have been green or brownish, depending on the minerals dissolved in them. The sun was about 20 to 25% dimmer than today, yet the planet remained warm thanks to high levels of greenhouse gases. There was no free oxygen in the atmosphere. This is crucial to understand. Oxygen is so abundant today, making up about 21% of the air, that we take it for granted. But oxygen is actually a highly reactive gas. Left to its own devices, it combines with other elements and disappears. The only reason oxygen persists in our atmosphere is because living things constantly produce it through photosynthesis. During the Archean, the microbes that dominated Earth did not produce oxygen. They were anaerobic, meaning they lived without oxygen and would have been poisoned by it. Many of them were methanogens, producing methane as a waste product. Others used sulfur, iron, or other chemicals for their metabolism. The world was chemically alien, yet teeming with life. The most visible evidence of Archean life comes from structures called stromatolites. These are layered mounds of rock, sometimes reaching several meters in height, built by communities of microorganisms. Cyanobacteria and other microbes formed sticky mats on the seafloor. Sediment accumulated on these mats, and the microbes grew up through it, forming a new layer. Over thousands of years, layer upon layer built up, creating the distinctive banded structures we see in the fossil record. The oldest known stromatolites are about 3.5 billion years old, found in the Pilbara region of Western Australia and the Barberton Greenstone Belt of South Africa. These ancient structures look remarkably similar to stromatolites still growing today in places like Shark Bay, Australia. It is humbling to realize that some of the oldest fossils on Earth were built by organisms whose descendants still exist, carrying on the same lifestyle after billions of years. Stromatolites were once common worldwide. They flourished in shallow coastal waters, building reefs that stretched for miles. But their heyday ended around 500 million years ago, when grazing animals evolved and began eating the microbial mats. Today, stromatolites survive only in environments too harsh for most grazers, such as the hypersaline waters of Shark Bay. They are living fossils, windows into an ancient world. During the Archean, the first true continents began to form. Earth's crust is made of two main types of rock. Oceanic crust is dense and composed mainly of basalt. Continental crust is lighter and composed mainly of granite and similar rocks. Because continental crust is less dense, it floats higher on the mantle and is not easily subducted back into the earth. The process of building continents is slow. Volcanic activity produces new rock. Some of this rock is dense and sinks. Some is light and accumulates. Over billions of years, patches of light rock merged and grew. By the end of the Archean, Perhaps 40% of today's continental crust had formed. These early continents were not arranged as they are today. Plate tectonics had already begun, moving the pieces around like a slow-motion puzzle. Evidence of Archean continents survives in the form of cratons, ancient cores of continental crust that remain stable over billions of years. The Canadian Shield, the Pilbara Craton in Australia, the Kopfel Craton in South Africa. These are some of the oldest pieces of Earth's surface, formed during the Archean and still with us today. When you stand on these ancient rocks, you are standing on foundations laid down before oxygen filled the air, before complex life existed, before the Earth we know began to take shape. The Great Oxygenation Event sometime during the Archean, probably between 3.5 and 2.7 billion years ago. A group of bacteria invented something that would change the world forever. They invented oxygenic photosynthesis. These bacteria, the cyanobacteria, learned to capture energy from sunlight and use it to split water molecules, releasing oxygen as a waste product. This was a revolutionary innovation. Earlier forms of photosynthesis used hydrogen sulfide or other chemicals as raw materials. Oxygenic photosynthesis used water, which was far more abundant. The cyanobacteria had tapped into an almost unlimited energy source. They spread across the planet, forming vast blooms in the oceans, building stromatolites along the coasts, and all the while they pumped oxygen into the environment. But for hundreds of millions of years, this oxygen did not accumulate in the atmosphere. It was absorbed by chemical reactions. Iron dissolved in the oceans, combined with oxygen and precipitated out as iron oxide, forming the banded iron formations we mine today for steel. Volcanic gases reacted with oxygen. The Earth's surface acted like a giant sponge, soaking up oxygen as fast as it was produced. Eventually, the sponge became saturated. The ocean's iron was used up. The volcanic gases could not keep pace. Around 2.4 billion years ago, oxygen began to accumulate in the atmosphere. This event, called the Great Oxygenation Event, or sometimes the Oxygen Catastrophe, was one of the most dramatic turning points in Earth's history. For the anaerobic organisms that had dominated Earth for over 1 billion years, oxygen was poison. It reacted with their cellular machinery, destroying enzymes and damaging DNA. The Great Oxygenation Event was an extinction event of staggering proportions. Most of the anaerobic microbes died. The survivors retreated to oxygen-free environments, mud at the bottom of lakes, deep in the soil, inside the guts of animals that would not evolve for another 2 billion years. For the world as a whole, the effects were profound. The chemistry of the oceans changed. Minerals that had been stable for billions of years were oxidized. The sky changed color. Methane in the atmosphere reacted with oxygen, reducing the greenhouse effect. And here is where things got really dramatic. Without the warming effect of methane, Earth plunged into ice. The Huronian glaciation, which began around 2.4 billion years ago, was one of the most severe ice ages in Earth's history. Glaciers spread from the poles toward the equator. Ice sheets covered much of the planet. Some scientists believe Earth may have frozen over completely during this period, becoming what they call Snowball Earth. The planet that had been a warm water world for billions of years was now a frozen wasteland. The evidence for this global glaciation comes from glacial deposits found at latitudes that should have been tropical. Rocks called diamictites, jumbled mixtures of different-sized particles dropped by glaciers, have been found on ancient tropical continents. Dropstones, large rocks dropped into fine sediments by melting icebergs, appear in rocks that formed at equatorial latitudes. Something had frozen the entire planet. How did Earth escape from Snowball Earth? Volcanoes continued to erupt beneath the ice, releasing carbon dioxide. With the oceans frozen, there was no rain to wash this carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. Levels built up over millions of years until the greenhouse effect became strong enough to melt the ice. The transition from frozen to tropical may have happened relatively quickly, perhaps over just a few thousand years. After the ice retreated, Earth entered a new phase. Oxygen continued to accumulate, though levels fluctuated dramatically over the following billion years. The planet was warmer again, but fundamentally different from the Archean. The atmosphere now contained oxygen. The chemistry of life was changing. New metabolic pathways became possible. The stage was being set for the next great leap in evolution, the boring billion. Between about 1.8 billion and 800 million years ago, something strange happened on Earth. Almost nothing happened. After the dramatic upheavals of the Great Oxygenation event and the Huronian glaciation, the planet entered a period of remarkable stability. Oxygen levels remained relatively constant at around 1 to 2% of modern levels. The climate was warm and stable. Evolution seemed to slow down. Scientists have nicknamed this period the boring billion. It is a tongue-in-cheek name because, of course, things were happening. Life continued to evolve. Continents continued to drift. But compared to the periods before and after, the rate of change was remarkably slow. No mass extinctions, no dramatic climate shifts, no evolutionary explosions, just a billion years of quiet existence. Why was this period so stable? Scientists are still debating. One theory is that the Earth system had reached a kind of equilibrium. Oxygen production by photosynthesis was balanced by oxygen consumption through weathering and volcanic activity. The supercontinent Columbia, which formed around 1.8 billion years ago, may have reduced volcanic activity by covering much of the Earth's surface with stable continental crust. Whatever the cause, Earth had entered a holding pattern. But the boring billion was not entirely boring. It was during this period that a new kind of life emerged, one that would eventually give rise to all plants, animals, and fungi. These were the eukaryotes, organisms whose cells contain a nucleus and other membrane-bound structures called organelles. All life before this point had been prokaryotic, meaning bacteria and archaea, with simple cells lacking internal compartments. Eukaryotic cells are far more complex. They are typically much larger than prokaryotic cells, with elaborate internal structures that allow for specialized functions. The nucleus contains DNA, protected from the rest of the cell. Mitochondria generate energy through aerobic respiration. Chloroplasts in plants and algae carry out photosynthesis. Where did eukaryotes come from? The answer is one of the most remarkable discoveries in biology. Mitochondria and chloroplasts were once free-living bacteria. About 2 billion years ago, a prokaryotic cell engulfed an aerobic bacterium but did not digest it. Instead, the two formed a partnership. The engulfed bacterium provided energy through aerobic respiration. The host cell provided protection and raw materials. Over billions of generations, the partnership became permanent. The engulfed bacterium evolved into the mitochondrion. This process, called endosymbiosis, happened at least twice. Chloroplasts originated from engulfed cyanobacteria, probably around 1.5 billion years ago. The evidence for endosymbiosis is overwhelming. Mitochondria and chloroplasts have their own DNA, separate from the nucleus, and this DNA is bacterial in nature. They have double membranes, consistent with being engulfed rather than produced internally. They replicate independently of the host cell, dividing by binary fission-like bacteria. The oldest definitive eukaryotic fossils are about 1.8 billion years old. These early eukaryotes were single-celled, like modern amoebae or paramecia. They would remain single-celled for another billion years, but the machinery was in place. The internal complexity of the eukaryotic cell would eventually allow for the evolution of multicellular life. The boring billion may have seemed quiet on the surface, but beneath that quiet, the foundations for the future were being laid. Snowball Earth returns. The boring billion ended with a bang. Actually, with ice. Between about 720 and 635 million years ago. During a period called the Cryogenian, Earth experienced its most severe ice ages since the Huronian glaciation over 1 billion years earlier. These were true Snowball Earth events, with ice extending from the poles to the equator. There were at least 2 major glaciations during this period. Distortion glaciation lasted from about 717 to 660 million years ago. The Marinoan glaciation followed from about 650 to 635 million years ago. Between them was a relatively warm period called the Cryogenian non-glacial interval. Both glaciations left evidence of ice at tropical latitudes, suggesting the entire planet froze over. What caused these extreme ice ages? The breakup of the supercontinent Rodinia, which had assembled during the boring billion, may have played a role. As Rodinia broke apart, new coastlines increased weathering. Weathering consumes carbon dioxide. Reduced carbon dioxide meant a weaker greenhouse effect and falling temperatures. Once ice began to spread, it reflected sunlight back into space, cooling the planet further. This runaway feedback loop may have driven Earth into snowball conditions. Life survived, but barely. Photosynthetic organisms would have been largely wiped out, cut off from sunlight by the ice. Survivors probably clung to existence around volcanic hot springs, in cracks in the ice, or in thin pockets of liquid water beneath the frozen surface. It was a close call. Had the ice lasted much longer, life on Earth might have been extinguished entirely. When the ice finally melted, something remarkable happened. Oxygen levels in the atmosphere spiked dramatically. This second oxygenation event, sometimes called the Neoproterozoic oxygenation event, raised atmospheric oxygen from a few percent of modern levels to perhaps 15% or more. For the first time, there was enough oxygen to support large, active animals. Why did oxygen rise after the glaciation? Several factors may have contributed. Nutrients released by weathering after the ice melted fueled massive blooms of photosynthetic organisms. Organic carbon was buried in sediments at unusually high rates. preventing it from consuming oxygen through decay. The same processes that ended the Ice Age may have pushed the Earth system into a new, more oxygenated state. The evidence for this oxygenation comes from multiple sources. Chemical signatures in rocks show a shift toward more oxidizing conditions. Sulfur isotopes change dramatically, indicating that the deep ocean, which had remained oxygen-free through most of Earth's history, finally became oxygenated. Iron minerals that can only form in the presence of oxygen appear in marine sediments. The world was changing, and life was about to explode. Strange life in the Ediacaran period, from 635 to 538 million years ago, saw the first appearance of large, complex organisms visible to the naked eye. After billions of years of microscopic life, Earth suddenly produced creatures that could grow to meters in length. These Ediacaran organisms are among the strangest life forms ever to exist, and scientists are still debating what exactly they were. The fossils were first discovered in the Ediacara Hills of South Australia in the 1940s. Though their significance was not recognized until later. Since then, similar fossils have been found on every continent. They include disc-shaped organisms like Dickinsonia, which could reach over a meter in diameter. Frond-like organisms like Charnia resembled modern sea pens, but may not be related to them. Trebiscidium had threefold symmetry, unlike any living animal. What were these creatures? Some were probably animals, early experiments in multicellular life that left no descendants. Others may have been giant, single-celled organisms, like modern Some might have been lichens, fungi, or entirely extinct kingdoms of life with no modern relatives. The Ediacaran biota represents a lost world, a glimpse of what might have been if evolution had taken a different path. These organisms lived in a world very different from our own. There were no predators, no shells, no hard parts of any kind. The seafloor was covered with microbial mats, and the Ediacaran creatures lay on or within these mats, absorbing nutrients directly through their skin. Some scientists have called this the Garden of Ediacara, a peaceful world of soft, sessile creatures living in harmony. The Garden of Ediacara did not last. Around 540 million years ago, most Ediacaran organisms disappeared from the fossil record. What replaced them was something entirely different, a world of predators and prey, of shells and teeth, of eat or be eaten. This transition, at the boundary between the Ediacaran and Cambrian periods, marks one of the most dramatic shifts in the history of life. What caused the Ediacaran extinction? Some scientists believe rising oxygen levels changed the rules of the game. With more oxygen available, animals could be more active, more mobile, more hungry. Predation became possible. The slow, sedentary Ediacaran life forms were not adapted for this new world. Others suggest that the evolution of burrowing animals destroyed the microbial mats that many Ediacaran organisms depended on. Still others point to changes in ocean chemistry or climate. Whatever the cause, the result was clear. The peaceful garden was swept away. In its place came something new, something violent, something wonderful. The Cambrian explosion was about to begin. The Cambrian explosion around 540 million years ago, in a geologically brief span of perhaps 20 million years. Nearly all major animal phyla appeared in the fossil record. Animals with eyes, with shells, with claws, with teeth, predators and prey, swimmers and crawlers and burrowers. After billions of years of microbial life and a few tens of millions of years of soft, strange Ediacaran creatures, the animal kingdom as we know it burst onto the scene. This event, called the Cambrian explosion, is one of the most important moments in evolutionary history. Before the Cambrian, fossils are rare and mostly microscopic. After the Cambrian, fossils are abundant and instantly recognizable as ancestors of modern animals. The contrast is so stark that for a long time, scientists called the Cambrian the beginning of life on Earth, unaware of the billions of years of evolution that preceded it. The most famous window into the Cambrian world is the Burgess Shale in British Columbia, Canada, discovered in 1909 by Charles Walcott. This site preserves an astonishing diversity of soft-bodied organisms in exquisite detail. Similar sites have since been found in China, Greenland, and elsewhere. Together, they reveal a world of bizarre and wonderful creatures. Consider Anomalocaris, a predator that could reach over a meter in length, with grasping appendages and compound eyes containing thousands of lenses. Consider Opabenia, with 5 eyes and a long proboscis ending in a claw. Consider Hallucigenia, named because scientists initially thought it was so strange it must have been a hallucination, with its spines and legs and enigmatic body plan. These creatures were real. They hunted and bred and died in Cambrian seas. They were our distant relatives. Scientists have proposed many explanations for the Cambrian explosion. Rising oxygen levels certainly played a role. Larger, more active animals require more oxygen, and the Neo-Proterozoic oxygenation event may have finally pushed levels high enough to support them. The evolution of eyes created new evolutionary pressures, as predators could now see their prey, and prey could see their predators. This may have triggered an arms race of adaptation. The evolution of hard parts, shells, and exoskeletons may have been driven by this same predation pressure. A shell provides protection, but building a shell requires minerals, which suggests that ocean chemistry may have changed in ways that made mineralization easier. Some scientists point to increasing calcium levels in the oceans as a key trigger. Genetic changes may also have been important. During the Cambrian, the basic body plans of animals were established. The genetic toolkit that controls development. The same genes that build a fly or a human today was being refined and expanded. New genes allowed new structures, new organs, new ways of living. Evolution was experimenting with possibilities, and many of those experiments succeeded. In truth, the Cambrian explosion was probably caused by all of these factors working together. Rising oxygen, new predation pressures, changing ocean chemistry, genetic innovation, all reinforced each other in a positive feedback loop that drove explosive diversification. Once the explosion began, it fed on itself, creating ever more niches and ever more diversity. Life leaves the sea. The Cambrian explosion established the basic body plans of animal life. The following period, the Ordovician from 485 to 443 million years ago, saw these body plans diversify further. Marine life became more complex, more varied, more ecological. This was the Ordovician radiation, sometimes called the Great Ordovician Biodiversification Event. During the Ordovician, the number of marine families tripled. Coral reefs appeared for the first time. Brachiopods, which look superficially like clams but are unrelated, dominated the seafloor. Trilobites, which had appeared in the Cambrian, diversified into thousands of species. Giant sea scorpions called eurypterids evolved, some reaching over 2 meters in length. Cephalopods developed shells and became major predators. The Ordovician seas were warm and shallow, covering much of what are now the continents. Sea levels were among the highest in Earth's history. This created vast areas of shallow water habitat, ideal for marine life. The continents were clustered in the southern hemisphere, with a large landmass called Gondwana covering the South Pole. For most of Earth's history, the land had been barren, rock, sand, maybe some microbial crusts, but no plants, no animals, no forests. The continents were like Mars, lifeless deserts exposed to the harsh radiation of the sun. But during the Ordovician and the following Silurian period, life finally began its conquest of the land. The first land plants were simple organisms, probably similar to modern liverworts and mosses. They lacked roots, stems, and leaves in the modern sense. They could only survive in very wet environments, close to water sources. Fossil spores suggest that plants were living on land by about 470 million years ago, though the first body fossils appear somewhat later. Why did plants move onto land? The advantages were enormous. On land, there was no competition for sunlight. The atmosphere was full of carbon dioxide. Nutrients were available in the soil, but the challenges were equally great. On land, there was no water to support the body. Ultraviolet radiation was intense. Reproduction, which for aquatic plants involved releasing sperm into the water, had to be completely reinvented. Plants solved these problems gradually over millions of years. They evolved waxy coatings to prevent water loss. They developed root-like structures to absorb water and nutrients. They evolved vascular tissue to transport water throughout the plant. By the Silurian period, around 430 million years ago, true vascular plants were colonizing the land. Animals followed plants onto land, probably first as grazers or decommatous. The oldest known land animal fossils are millipede-like creatures from the Silurian, around 420 million years ago. By the Devonian period, which followed the Silurian, scorpions, spiders, and the first insects had appeared. The land was coming alive. The Devonian world, the Devonian period, from 419 to 358 million years ago, is often called the Age of Fishes. While fish had existed since the Cambrian, it was during the Devonian that they truly came into their own. The oceans teemed with an incredible diversity of fish, from tiny jawless forms to armored giants. The most fearsome predator of the Devonian seas was Dunkleosteus, a placoderm or armored fish that could reach over 6 meters in length. Its head and front body were covered in bony plates, and its jaws, while lacking true teeth, had sharp bony edges that could slice through almost anything. Dunkleosteus was the great white shark of its age, the apex predator of a dangerous world. But the most important fish of the Devonian were not the largest. They were the lobe-finned fishes, a group that would give rise to all land vertebrates, including ourselves. Lobe-finned fishes had fleshy fins supported by bones that correspond to the bones in our arms and legs. Some of them, like Tiktaalik, could prop themselves up on their fins and breathe air. They were the first vertebrates to venture onto land. On land, the Devonian saw a transformation equally dramatic. The simple, low-growing plants of the Silurian gave way to the first true forests. Trees evolved, some reaching heights of 8 meters or more. The first seed plants appeared, freeing plants from their dependence on water for reproduction. By the end of the Devonian, forests covered much of the land. One of the most remarkable Devonian forests has been preserved at Gilboa in New York State. Here, fossil tree stumps up to 1 meter in diameter have been found in their original growth positions. These trees, called Eospermatopterus, were not related to any modern tree. They were experiments in tree building, one of several independent evolutions of the tree form. The spread of forests had profound effects on the planet. Trees absorbed carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, reducing greenhouse warming. Their roots broke down rock, creating soil. Fallen leaves and branches accumulated faster than they could decay, burying carbon in sediments. Oxygen levels rose as carbon was buried. By the end of the Devonian, atmospheric oxygen may have reached 35%, compared to 21% today. But this carbon burial had a dark side. By removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, the forests helped trigger another ice age. The late Devonian saw a series of extinction events, probably driven by climate change and falling sea levels. About 75% of all species went extinct. The age of fishes came to a violent end. The Carboniferous and the Coal Age. The Carboniferous period. From 358 to 298 million years ago was one of the most remarkable times in Earth's history. Vast, swampy forests covered the tropical continents. The air was thick with oxygen, reaching levels up to 35%. And in this oxygen-rich environment, insects grew to sizes that seem impossible today. Meganeura was a dragonfly with a wingspan of over 65 centimeters, about the size of a seagull. Arthropleura was a millipede that could reach 2.5 meters in length, the largest land invertebrate ever known. Giant spiders, giant scorpions, giant cockroaches. The Carboniferous was the age of giant bugs. Why did insects grow so large? The answer lies in how insects breathe. Unlike vertebrates, insects do not have lungs. Instead, they breathe through a network of tubes called trachea that deliver oxygen directly to their tissues. This system works well at small sizes, but becomes less efficient as an insect grows larger. With more oxygen in the air, the trachea could deliver enough oxygen to larger bodies. When oxygen levels later fell, giant insects became impossible. The Carboniferous gets its name from carbon, specifically from the vast coal deposits that formed during this period. Most of the world's coal comes from Carboniferous forests, buried and compressed over hundreds of millions of years. But why did so much organic material accumulate during this specific time? The answer involves lignin, the tough compound that gives wood its strength. Lignin evolved during the Devonian, allowing plants to grow tall. But for millions of years, no organism could break it down effectively. When trees fell, they did not rot. They simply piled up layer upon layer in the swampy forests. Over time, these layers were buried and compressed, transformed by heat and pressure into coal. Eventually, fungi evolved the ability to digest lignin. This happened around the end of the Carboniferous, which is probably not a coincidence. Once fungi could break down wood, dead trees rotted normally, and coal formation slowed dramatically. The window for coal formation, when lignin existed but lignin-digesting organisms did not, lasted perhaps 60 million years. Most of the coal we burn today was formed during this narrow window. The burial of all this carbon had enormous effects on the climate. Carbon dioxide levels dropped. The greenhouse effect weakened. Temperatures fell. Glaciers spread across the southern supercontinent Gondwana. The Carboniferous saw repeated ice ages, with sea levels rising and falling as ice sheets expanded and contracted. Yet life flourished. The coal swamps teemed with amphibians and early reptiles. Fish filled the rivers. Insects darkened the skies. The Permian and the Great Dying, the Permian period, from 298 to 252 million years ago, saw the rise of reptiles as the dominant land animals. While amphibians had ruled the Carboniferous swamps, reptiles were better adapted to drier conditions. They had waterproof skin that prevented water loss. They laid eggs with shells that could survive on land. They did not need to return to water to breed. During the Permian, all the continents merged into a single supercontinent called Pangaea, meaning all lands. This enormous landmass stretched from pole to pole. Its interior was vast and dry, far from any ocean. Deserts spread across regions that had been swampy forests in the Carboniferous. Life had to adapt to these new, harsher conditions. One group of reptiles that flourished during the Permian were the synapsids, ancestors of modern mammals. Early synapsids, like Dimetrodon, had large sails on their backs, probably for temperature regulation. Later synapsids became more mammal-like, with differentiated teeth and possibly warm-bloodedness. These creatures were the dominant land animals of the late Permian, and they gave rise to our own lineage. 252 million years ago, the Permian ended in the worst mass extinction in Earth's history. It is often called the Great Dying. Over 90% of all marine species went extinct. 70% of land species disappeared. It took millions of years for life to recover. In some ways, it never fully did. What caused this catastrophe? The evidence points to massive volcanic eruptions in what is now Siberia. These eruptions, called the Siberian Traps, released enormous amounts of lava, covering an area larger than Western Europe. But the lava itself was not the killer. The real threat came from the gases released: carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, methane, and other toxic compounds. The eruptions may have lasted for millions of years, releasing enough carbon dioxide to raise global temperatures by 5 to 10 degrees Celsius. The oceans warmed and lost oxygen. Acid rain fell on land and sea. The ozone layer was damaged, exposing life to harmful ultraviolet radiation. Methane released from seafloor deposits may have accelerated the warming in a deadly feedback loop. The recovery from the Great Dying was slow and painful. For millions of years afterward, ecosystems were simplified and unstable. Many groups that had been common before the extinction never recovered. Others survived, but in reduced numbers. The synapsids, which had dominated the Permian, were largely replaced by a new group of reptiles, the archosaurs, which would give rise to dinosaurs, the Mesozoic era, and the Age of Dinosaurs. The Mesozoic era, from 250 to 266 million years ago, is often called the Age of Reptiles, but it might better be called the Age of Recovery. The first period of the Mesozoic, the Triassic, saw life slowly rebuilding after the devastation of the Permian extinction. New groups evolved to fill the empty niches. Dinosaurs first appeared during the Triassic, around 230 million years ago. The earliest dinosaurs were small bipedal creatures, probably just 1 to 2 meters long. They shared the world with many other reptile groups, including crocodile relatives, mammal-like reptiles, and the flying pterosaurs. Dinosaurs were not yet dominant. The Triassic ended with another mass extinction about 201 million years ago. While not as severe as the Permian extinction, It wiped out many competing reptile groups and cleared the way for dinosaurs to take over. From that point on, dinosaurs ruled the Earth. The Jurassic period, from 201 to 145 million years ago, saw dinosaurs reach their full glory. Sauropods, the long-necked plant eaters, became the largest land animals ever. Some, like Argentinosaurus, may have weighed over 70 tons and stretched over 30 meters long. Theropods, the meat-eaters, included fearsome predators like Allosaurus. The Cretaceous period, from 145 to 66 million years ago, continued this trend. Tyrannosaurus rex, perhaps the most famous dinosaur, lived during the late Cretaceous. So did the horned Triceratops, the duck-billed hadrosaurs, and the armored ankylosaurs. Birds, which had evolved from small feathered dinosaurs during the Jurassic, diversified. Flowering plants appeared and spread across the land. During the Mesozoic, Pangaea began to break apart. The Atlantic Ocean opened as the Americas separated from Africa and Europe. India broke away from Antarctica and began its long journey toward Asia. The continents slowly drifted toward their modern positions. Life evolved in increasing isolation on different landmasses, leading to regional differences in dinosaur faunas. The oceans were also changing. Sea levels rose to some of the highest in Earth's history. Shallow seas covered much of North America, Europe, and other continents. Marine reptiles like plesiosaurs and mosasaurs ruled the waters. Giant ammonites, relatives of modern squid with coiled shells, were abundant. It was a world very different from our own. The end of the dinosaurs 66 million years ago. A mountain fell from the sky. An asteroid about 10 to 15 kilometers in diameter struck what is now the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico, traveling at roughly 20 kilometers per second. The energy released was equivalent to billions of nuclear bombs. It was the most violent event in the past several 100 million years of Earth history. The impact created the Chicxulub crater, more than 150 kilometers in diameter and 20 kilometers deep. The asteroid vaporized on impact, along with cubic kilometers of rock. A fireball expanded outward, incinerating everything within 1,000 kilometers. Tsunamis, hundreds of meters high, swept across the Gulf of Mexico and beyond. Earthquakes shook the entire planet, but the immediate devastation was just the beginning. The impact threw billions of tons of dust and debris into the atmosphere. Wildfires, ignited by falling debris, added smoke and soot. The sun was blocked out, perhaps for months or even years. Temperatures plummeted. Photosynthesis collapsed. Plants died. The animals that depended on them died too. The evidence for this impact is overwhelming. In rocks from 66 million years ago, scientists have found a thin layer rich in iridium, an element rare on Earth but common in asteroids. They have found shocked quartz, a mineral that forms only under extreme pressure. And they have found the crater itself, buried under sediments, but detectable through gravity measurements and drilling. The extinction at the end of the Cretaceous, often called the KPG extinction, killed about 75% of all species. All non-bird dinosaurs went extinct. So did the pterosaurs, the marine reptiles, the ammonites, and many other groups. The Mesozoic world was swept away in a geological instant, but some survivors made it through. Birds, descendants of theropod dinosaurs, survived. So did crocodilians, turtles, and many fish. Mammals, which had remained small throughout the Mesozoic, emerged from their burrows into a changed world. With the dinosaurs gone, opportunities opened over the following millions of years. Mammals would diversify into the incredible variety we see today, from whales to bats to humans. The KPG extinction was a catastrophe, but it was also an opportunity. Evolution builds on what survives. The world that emerged from the ashes of the dinosaurs was our world. The world of mammals and birds and flowering plants. We owe our existence, in a very real sense, to a rock from space that happened to hit the right spot 66 million years ago. The Cenozoic era and the rise of mammals. The Cenozoic era, from 66 million years ago to the present, is our era, the age of mammals. After spending over 100 million years in the shadow of dinosaurs, mammals finally had their chance. They seized it with remarkable speed and creativity. Within just a few million years of the extinction, mammals had evolved to fill many of the niches left empty by dinosaurs. New groups appeared, many unfamiliar to us today. Mesonychids were wolf-like predators with hooves. Creodonts were another predatory group, unrelated to modern carnivores. Androsarchus, possibly the largest land mammal predator ever, had a skull nearly a meter long. By about 30 million years after the extinction, most modern mammal groups had appeared. Horses, though just the size of small dogs at first. Elephants, beginning their long evolution toward giants. Primates, climbing in the tropical forests. Whales, returning to the sea. their ancestors had left hundreds of millions of years before, bats taking to the air. The diversity of mammals exploded. The Cenozoic has been a time of gradual cooling. At the beginning of the era, Earth was warm and humid, with tropical forests extending to high latitudes. There were no permanent ice caps. Sea levels were high. But over the following tens of millions of years, the climate slowly changed. Several factors contributed to this cooling. The continents continued to drift, and their positions affected ocean currents and heat distribution. Antarctica reached the South Pole and became isolated by circumpolar currents that kept warm water away. The Himalayas rose as India collided with Asia, weathering rock and drawing carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. Gradually, temperatures fell. About 34 million years ago, ice sheets formed on Antarctica for the first time in hundreds of millions of years. Global temperatures dropped. Tropical forests retreated toward the equator, replaced by grasslands and temperate forests. Many groups of mammals that had thrived in the warm world went extinct, replaced by others better adapted to cooler, drier conditions. The cooling continued, with fluctuations, through the rest of the Cenozoic. About 2.6 million years ago, ice sheets began forming in the northern hemisphere as well. Earth entered the current ice age, with glaciers advancing and retreating in cycles driven by variations in Earth's orbit. We are living in an interglacial period now, a relatively warm interval between glacial advances. The ice will return. The Ice Ages and the Pleistocene epoch, from about 2.6 million to 12,000 years ago, was dominated by ice ages. But this was not a single continuous cold period. Instead, glaciers advanced and retreated repeatedly in cycles lasting tens of thousands of years. At glacial maxima, ice sheets covered much of North America, Europe, and northern Asia. At interglacial periods like our own, the ice retreated and temperatures were similar to today. These cycles are driven by variations in Earth's orbit, known as Milankovitch cycles, after the Serbian scientist who first calculated them. Earth's orbit around the Sun is not perfectly circular or stable. The shape of the orbit changes over about 100,000 years. Press the tilt of Earth's axis wobbles over about 41,000 years. The timing of the seasons relative to Earth's closest approach to the Sun shifts over about 26,000 years. Together, these changes affect how much sunlight reaches different parts of the Earth at different times of year, triggering the advance and retreat of ice sheets. The effects of these ice ages were profound. Sea levels fell by over 120 meters during glacial maxima as water was locked up in ice. Land bridges appeared connecting continents. Britain was connected to Europe. Alaska was connected to Siberia by a bridge of land called Beringia. Animals and humans could walk between continents that are now separated by ocean. The Pleistocene was an age of giants. Woolly mammoths roamed the northern plains, well adapted to the cold with their thick fur and layers of fat. Giant ground sloths, some as large as elephants, lived in the Americas. Saber-toothed cats hunted across multiple continents. Giant, short-faced bears stood over 3 meters tall. Dire wolves ran in packs. The world was populated by creatures that seem almost mythical today. Why were Pleistocene animals so large? Several factors may have contributed. The Ice Age climate favored large bodies, which retain heat better than small ones. Grasslands provided abundant food for large herbivores, and there may have been evolutionary feedback loops as predators grew larger to hunt larger prey, which in turn grew larger to escape larger predators. Most of this megafauna is now gone. Starting around 50,000 years ago and continuing to about 10,000 years ago, large animals disappeared from continent after continent. The timing varies by region, but the pattern is clear. In Australia, the megafauna disappeared around 45,000 years ago. In North America, around 11,000 years ago. In Madagascar, as recently as 1,000 years ago. What caused these extinctions? The debate continues, but most scientists believe humans played a major role. The timing of megafaunal extinctions correlates remarkably well with the arrival of humans on different continents. Large animals that had evolved without human predators were vulnerable. They did not know to fear these new hunters. Climate change at the end of the Ice Age may have contributed, but humans were almost certainly the main driver. The rise of humanity. Humans are newcomers on Earth. Our species, Homo sapiens, appeared around 300,000 years ago in Africa. Our ancestors had been evolving for millions of years before that, gradually becoming more upright, more intelligent, more human. But in the context of 4.5 billion years of Earth history, we arrived just moments ago. The first members of our genus, Homo, appeared about 2.8 million years ago in Africa. Early species like Homo habilis made simple stone tools. Homo erectus, appearing about 2 million years ago, was the first human ancestor to leave Africa, spreading across Asia and Europe. These were our direct ancestors, not quite human, but recognizably on the path. By 300,000 years ago, Homo sapiens had emerged in Africa. These early humans looked much like us, with high foreheads, small faces, and gracile bodies. They made sophisticated tools and left behind evidence of symbolic thinking, including decorated shells and pigments for body paint. They were us, or at least the first draft of us. Around 70,000 to 100,000 years ago, some humans left Africa. They spread first into the Middle East, then into Asia, Europe, and eventually Australia and the Americas. This migration was not a single event, but a series of waves over tens of thousands of years. As humans spread, they encountered other human species. Neanderthals had lived in Europe and Western Asia for hundreds of thousands of years. Denisovans occupied parts of Asia. On the island of Flores in Indonesia, a diminutive human called Homo floresiensis survived until perhaps 50,000 years ago. These were our cousins, not our ancestors. We interbred with some of these cousins. DNA analysis shows that most non-African humans carry 1 to 4% Neanderthal DNA. Some Asian and Oceanian populations carry Denisovan DNA as well. The boundaries between human species were not as sharp as we once thought. We are all hybrids, carrying genetic contributions from multiple human populations. By about 12,000 years ago, humans had spread to every continent except Antarctica. We had survived the last ice age, developed language and art and religion, and begun to reshape the world in our image. The Holocene epoch, our current epoch, had begun. The Anthropocene. In the past 10,000 years, humans have transformed Earth more dramatically than any single species in the planet's history. We invented agriculture, which allowed populations to grow and cities to rise. We domesticated animals and plants, reshaping ecosystems around our needs. We developed technologies that gave us power over nature that our ancestors could not have imagined. Some scientists argue that we have entered a new geological epoch, the Anthropocene, the human epoch. The exact starting point is debated. Some point to the beginning of agriculture about 10,000 years ago. Others to the Industrial Revolution around 250 years ago. Still others to the mid-20th century, when nuclear testing left a distinctive signature in sediments worldwide. Whenever we date its beginning, the Anthropocene is real. Humans now move more sediment than all natural processes combined. We have altered the composition of the atmosphere, raising carbon dioxide levels higher than they have been in millions of years. We have changed the nitrogen cycle through fertilizer use. We have redirected rivers, leveled mountains, and filled in seas. The biological effects have been equally dramatic. We are causing what many scientists call the sixth mass extinction. Species are disappearing at rates not seen since the dinosaurs died. We have introduced species to new continents, scrambling biogeographic patterns that took millions of years to develop. We have bred new organisms through selective breeding and genetic engineering. Perhaps our most significant impact has been on climate. By burning fossil fuels, we have released carbon that was buried during the Carboniferous and other periods, returning it to the atmosphere as carbon dioxide. Atmospheric carbon dioxide has risen from about 280 parts per million before the Industrial Revolution to over 420 parts per million today, a level not seen in at least 4 million years. This increase is causing global warming. Average temperatures have risen by more than 1 degree Celsius since the late 19th century, with most of the increase occurring in recent decades. Ice sheets are melting, sea levels are rising, weather patterns are changing. The effects are already visible and will become more severe in the coming decades. Looking at Earth's history, we know that climate can change dramatically. We know that carbon dioxide levels affect temperature. We know that past climate shifts have caused mass extinctions. The difference now is that we are the cause. For the first time in 4.5 billion years, a single species is deliberately and knowingly altering the planet's climate. Looking back and looking forward, what a journey! We have traveled from the birth of a world in fire and collision, through billions of years of change and evolution, to the present day. We have seen continents form and break apart and form again. We have watched life appear, almost as soon as conditions allowed, and then spread to every corner of the planet. We have witnessed catastrophic extinctions and explosive radiations. We have seen microbes transform the atmosphere, plants conquer the land, and animals develop ever more complex forms. And through it all, Earth has been a dynamic, changing world. There is no final state, no end point toward which everything has been moving. The Earth of 4 billion years ago was different from the Earth of 2 billion years ago, which was different from the Earth of 500 million years ago, which was different from the Earth of today. Change is the only constant. The evidence for this history is written in rocks, in fossils, in the very chemistry of the air and oceans. Geologists can read these records like pages in a book. They tell us of ancient seas and vanished mountains, of climates warm and cold, of life flourishing and dying. Every rock is a story. Every fossil is a character. Every isotope ratio is a clue. What does the future hold? In the short term, by geological standards, we face the consequences of our own actions. Climate change, biodiversity loss, pollution. These are challenges we must address in the coming decades. The choices we make now will shape the Earth our descendants inherit. In the longer term, Earth's story will continue regardless of what we do. Continents will continue to drift. In about 250 million years, they will likely merge into another supercontinent, which scientists have named Pangaea Ultima. The climate will change. Ice ages will come and go. Evolution will continue, producing forms of life we cannot imagine. Even longer term, the sun is slowly brightening. In about 1 billion years, it will be hot enough to evaporate Earth's oceans. In about 5 billion years, the sun will expand into a red giant, possibly engulfing Earth entirely. Our planet has already lived through most of its habitable lifetime. The future, measured in billions of years, is shorter than the past, but that is billions of years away. For now, Earth remains a vibrant, living world. It is the only home we have ever known, the only place in the universe where we know for certain that life exists. 4.5 billion years of history have produced a planet of staggering beauty and complexity. We are part of that history, products of evolution, made of atoms forged in ancient stars. So tonight, as you look up at the sky or down at the ground beneath your feet, remember where it all came from. Remember the collisions and catastrophes, the patient work of microbes, and the explosive creativity of evolution. Remember that you are made of stardust, shaped by billions of years of cosmic and biological history. The story of Earth is your story. It is our story, and it is far from over. Thank you for joining me tonight on this journey through deep time. Sleep well, and may your dreams be filled with ancient seas and vanished worlds. Good night.